The following video is 100% AI free. Sam Altman, sit and swivel. Hey paisanos, it's August, which means it's time for what I love the most. Spooky stories! What better way to cool oneself down during the hot midsummer than with some chills and spills? Let's take another brief trip to the past, as I often like to do, and wistfully reminisce about the computer exchange of the late 90s, a one-time hub for import games and hardware, trash, and treasure. They had a truly remarkable selection of obscure games, and perusing their shelves for the weirdest thing you could find is an experience you simply won't get in London these days. One sweltering summer day, not unlike today, a teenage Nervous picked this out. What the hell is this? How do I even pronounce this? Oh, okay. It's Iru. So generously priced at £5 English by one David Jordan. Thanks, David! A few of you have asked me to cover this one, and it's near and dear to my heart, so I thought why not. Set on a late spring evening within Kirigaoka High, an island-bound boarding school, it's the night before the annual cultural festival, and third-year Inaba Tatsuya is staying late to finish building his class's takoyaki stand, in hopes to impress his crush, the popular Ichinomiya Yuma. When the lights go out unexpectedly, this becomes an evening Inaba won't soon forget. Proudly displaying the logo of toy manufacturer Takara, with a pretty funny terror sound stinger, Iru was the first and last stab at horror by Soft Machine, a low-key Japanese studio who primarily developed pachinko games. True sickos may recognize their beat-em-ups Lucifer Ring and Crisis Beat, both almost assuredly made in the same engine as Iru, and both of which inexplicably received Western digital releases on PlayStation Network between 2013 and 2014. Play them on your Sony handheld device today!
Excuse me.
I'm sure I've mentioned before that Japanese school horror is absolutely my jam. Your toilet Hanakos, your Akamantos, your 7 mysteries, I love all that stuff. And while Iru initially hints at being this type of story, it's actually somewhat of a partial misdirect. Iru is actually a cosmic horror story, and appears to be a devoted fan work of the wider Cthulhu mythos, paying tribute to not only H.P. Lovecraft, but also Robert Bloch, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert W. Chambers, and Robert E. Howard. However, one familiar with tabletop role-playing games will quickly notice that much of the malevolence, monsters, and MacGuffins that appear within Iru are present within Sandy Peterson's Call of Cthulhu, which was first localized into Japanese in 1986 and became a smash hit. One can surmise that Soft Machine were big fans. It's quite possible that Iru, a la Lodos War, may very well be an adaptation of an original module enjoyed by the development team. That said, I'm pretty familiar with many of the stories referenced in this game, so I'll make a quick sidebar whenever something I recognize comes up. Iru was directed by Ikezawa Toshihiko, who seems to be more of a project manager sent in by Takara rather than an employee of Soft Machine outright. He has senior credits on a very eclectic selection of Takara-published titles of this era, including the Super Famicom port of Princess Maker, and Go! For Saturn. Most of the team here only worked on a handful of projects before quietly exiting the games industry at the turn of the millennium. Some of the bigger names on this project are planner Endo Kojiro, who went on to direct many of the Way of the Samurai titles for Spike, before ending up at Nintendo around the end of the 2010s, programmer Kuwabara Hirotoshi, a wizard who regularly lends his talents to any number of Square Enix remasters, from Dragon Quest to Saga, and composer Suemura Kenosuke. The very same year as Iru, he served as sound engineer for Wachenroder, before going on to contribute to a handful of Arc System Works fighters in the 2000s. Iru's soundtrack is pretty slight at 12 minutes, but it fits the game's disquieting mood perfectly, and I really like it. In July of 2021, Snowy Aria and her pals at 8 Mansions, fine purveyors of the most charming kusoge, released an English fan translation. A Spanish patch by Mr. Nobody, released later that month, making Iru accessible to more of the world. If this sounds like your jam, I'd really recommend that you play it and then come back. A blind playthrough will take you less than 5 hours, and Snowy's patch includes a walkthrough PDF in case you get stuck. If you'd like a spoiler-free overview of Iru, please check out my 2021 article for Hardcore Gaming 101, and then come back. Please, come back. So you may be wondering about the title. Iru has no direct translation into English. It's the casual or dictionary form of an intransitive verb which denotes the presence of a living being within a space. About the best we can do is, "It's here!" or "They're here!" the latter of which was used in the fan translation. There's something fitting about a cosmic horror game by a developer named after a William S. Burroughs novel having no easy translation. Language is a virus from outer space, after all. Before we get into it, let's take a little look at what we're working with here. Aside from the aforementioned computer exchange sticker, we have remnants of another sticker on top of the jewel case. I think this must be from a Japanese second-hand store before it made its way to me. The back of the box gives very little away. Something bad is going to happen at the cultural festival. Fun blood spatter design on the disc here, next to this blood-red hiragana with its ghostly outline, which, like the Takara logo, is unprinted and completely reflective. Let's flip through the manual together. We start with the prologue, setting the stage of Kirigaoka High School the night before the cultural festival. Next, we have a sort of Gakko no Nanafushigi page that goes over the current rumors circulating around the school. Weird sounds heard by students who've stayed late, like agonized groans coming from within the clock tower, or the sounds of Buddhist sutras coming from the rooftop. A room on the first floor has been sealed by the faculty without any explanation. A friend of a friend of a friend said they saw a student who supposedly transferred to another school, leaping to their death from the roof. This is the good stuff. We even have 7 bullet points at the bottom of the page to drive the point home, from the mundane, like a new konbini opening soon, to the more sinister, like a teacher named Mr. Mori being suspected of stalking. Next, we have instructions for playing the game and the controls, and the promise that we'll be spending a lot of time hiding from and eventually defeating a series of monsters. More on this later. The DualShock is acknowledged, but not used. The next couple of pages have additional explanations of gameplay, including how to maneuver the protagonist within a 3D first-person space, which I suppose might be a little unusual for a Japanese console gamer in 1998, or at least one who hasn't played Crime Crackers. This page also tells us how to hide when we're being pursued. The next page is kind of a second prologue, detailing what a pain in the butt everybody's being around prepping for the cultural festival, and how Tatsuya decides to take an angry nap to deal with it. Then we have an annotated map of the entire school over the next few pages, which is really useful. Here we go, character bios for our major players. Our man Tatsuya is shown in silhouette, but we can get a good look at him in-game if we take a trip to the school restroom. Aside from these hair curtains, he has no other facial features, so you can easily imprint yourself onto this virile young buck. Ugh. Tatsuya's bio describes him as a bit of a damp squib, who's nonetheless capable of rising to the occasion when needs must. Here's Yuma, our heroine and love interest. This little rich girl is friendly, forthright, and resilient, except for when it comes to scary stories. It's an open secret that she and Tatsuya are in kind of a will-they, won't-they friendship. A handful of other character bios are here, but we'll talk about them when they show up in-game. Now finally, this page is my favorite. Up top, we have an ad for the Takara HMD Dinovisor, an early, not quite VR headset that was basically just putting a little CRT on your head. From what I understand, this headset was initially closely associated with the Atari Jaguar, but Atari pulled out, leaving Takara to advertise their expensive device in the back of Iru's manual. Apparently this did pretty well on its home turf. I won't be buying one myself, but it seems like you can snag one for about $150 on eBay. If you'd like to know more about the Dino Vision, I strongly recommend this video by Octavius King, who goes hands-on with it. Now even juicier than this, the bottom of this page is something of an ARG. Leaning into the Toshi Densetsu craze, this memo from one of the developers states that Iru, the game, is cursed, and the staff at Soft Machine underwent a series of misfortunes during development. The scenario planner disappeared only to turn up in an unnamed port town, looking possessed. Relatives of programmers died under mysterious circumstances, and strange figures cloaked in darkness have appeared in the company office after dark. This is a fun and cute touch, and naturally none of it is true. Or is it? Oh, and here's some instructions on what not to do with your copy of Iru. Check out that evil sun. Okay then, without further ado, let's get to Iru. We open on the sound of rain, frantic footsteps, and belabored breathing. A girl in school uniform bursts into a darkened chapel. The camera whirls above her from an isometric angle as we read narration from our protagonist, Inaba. Viewing so clearly, yet from afar, he watches helplessly as the girl, recognized as his classmate Aikawa Kaori, falls to her knees before the statue of a goddess. Someone, or something, enters the chapel behind her. She screams, her crimson blood splattering onto the pristine white statue. Inaba has witnessed this scene again, and again, always powerless to stop it. Standing before the full moon is Aikawa, seemingly alive, who transmits a message directly to Inaba. Heretics within the school are plotting to release something nefarious under a lunar eclipse. She urges him to run away and take as many students with him to safety, but before he can ask further questions, her presence fades away. Tender music plays, the love theme of Iru. It was all a dream, as Inaba opens his eyes to find a very put-out Yuma looking over him. Caught sleeping on the job, leaving Yuma to work on preparations for the cultural festival alone. A truly shameful young man. Yuma recognizes the name Aikawa as the principal's granddaughter, who recently transferred to another campus without any notice or ceremony. Could Inaba's dream be premonition of something sinister? Well, regardless, the other club members have scattered around the campus, shirking their duty to the takoyaki stand. As we head out to find them, the art club teacher, Hojo Saiko, comes in to inform Yuma she's got student council responsibilities with herself and another student named Hikawa. These low-polygon character models are a little rough for 1998, but so charming. Look at how frantically everybody blinks. Together, the two ladies head out, leaving Inaba alone in his homeroom, Class 3-4. And here's where the game begins proper. Iru is a first-person adventure game in a fully 3D world. In development before the DualShock, and many years before Sony figured out how to use the right stick, Iru has Kingsfield controls. The D-pad directions are tank controls, while L1 and R1 strafe, L2 looks up, R2 looks down, Square opens the menu where we can examine and interact with our inventory or remap our controls, Triangle crouches, Maru is interact, Batsu is cancel, all is right with the world. You can hold the X button down to run, and the camera bobs around a bit to simulate motion. Probably a bit much if you get motion sick, but I don't. If the menu screen wasn't enough of a hint, this is an inventory-based adventure game, so the first thing we need to do is pick up this crowbar that's been so carelessly laid in the middle of the floor. And then we can head out into the halls, where the once calming music takes on a slightly more spooky tone. The short draw distance uses technical limitations to the game's favor. The hallways evaporate into inky darkness, not 10 paces in any given direction. Kirigaoka boasts 4 floors. Being a third year, Inaba's classroom, as well as our starting point, is here on the 3rd floor. It soon becomes apparent that something is quite wrong here. The fire shutters are down, seemingly blocking the exits. A particularly exploration-focused player can learn that the phone lines have been cut, and that an awful smell is emanating from within a locked classroom. There are a staggering amount of things to interact with in Iru. Almost every object will grant us a little bit of flavor text. Checking the roster in 3-4 will remind us that the other members of the festival team are Hirose Mitsuru and Mochizuki Tetsuo, giving us an idea of who we should keep an eye out for if we forgot what Yuma told us earlier. In the center of the school is a multi-story clock tower with an arcane mechanism depicting an eclipse. Loafing nearby is Hirose, our full-bodied comic relief character, a common and unfortunate stereotype. Hirose is obese, lazy, walks silly, and only ever talks about food. He won't come back to the classroom, even after we bribe him with bread. It doesn't escape my notice that they chose the name Hirose, which contains the kanji for wide. Mochizuki, in sharp contrast, is tall, thin, and foul-tempered, his antisocial attitude obvious from his Harlan Ellison glasses. He's first encountered in the art room, engaged in a heated discussion with Miss Hojo. Well, Mochizuki is heated anyway. Check out Hojo sitting somewhat coquettishly on the sink. He's giving her the third degree about his brother, Masayoshi, who seems to have vanished without a trace. Giving no answers, Hojo hops off the sink and walks off, heels wet with sink water slapping against the floor. Mochizuki, like Hirose, comes up with an excuse not to help us finish our takoyaki stand. But hey, how about that Kirigaoka high school uniform, huh? A reptilian green plaid pant and a gleaming white shirt cut right down the middle by a sickly purple necktie. I really like these colors, they reflect the ominous setting really nicely. There are a few other characters we can meet as we explore the third floor. First is Hikawa Kazuki, the perfectly coiffed bad boy who appears to be something of a bully. He should be with Yuma, but he's goofing off over here instead, blockading the exit with desks for some reason, tapping his little foot. We can't get much out of him right now. In Class 3-3, we find Misa, who has twin pigtails and a bad attitude.
He was a pretty girl and was always a school popular person. You're a neat little girl with a bad personality, right?
She obviously has a thing for Hikawa, and while it's unclear if the two are actually in a relationship, he appears to be keeping her waiting here. Misa doesn't really seem to like Inaba, but if we tell her that we saw Hikawa in the hall just now, her icy exterior cracks ever so slightly, allowing a modicum of warmth to slip out. Standing by the shutter closest to our classroom is Nakanishi, wondering who lowered the shutters and for what reason. I honestly don't have a lot to say about this guy. His main characteristic is his blonde mullet. At the end of the hall, we find our first save point, a geometric sigil pristinely sketched in chalk onto a blackboard stand. These blackboards are found throughout Kirigaoka, often at the end of nondescript and barren hallways, mixing relief with an omen of ill portent. Who sketched and placed these around the school? What does it mean to focus one's energy and memories into its design? Our next objective is to figure out what happened between Mochizuki and Miss Hojo. This is a portent of things to come. Iru is very much a try to locate the person who will trigger the next plot flag type of adventure game, and much of its duration will see you chasing after Mochizuki, Hojo, or Yuma in equal parts, trying to puzzle out where they may be. Hojo's office is a sinister place. Gruesome paintings hang on the walls which flank Hojo's desk, and her bookshelves are filled not with art reference books, but spell books in many different languages. A conspicuous locked cabinet boasts a gold frame and keyhole marked with a ruby, seemingly containing books she's deemed of particular importance. Hojo tells us that Masayoshi went missing 3 years ago. She believes he disappeared because he confessed his love to her, and as a teacher, she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. She believes that the younger Mochizuki sibling holds her personally responsible. Taking this back to Mochizuki in an attempt to talk him down, he believes there's more to this story. He spied a copy of De Vermis Mysteris within the locked cabinet in her office, an exceedingly rare grimoire which was once in his brother's possession. So, De Vermis Mysteris, or in English, Mysteries of the Worm. Those of you familiar with classic horror fiction will no doubt recognize this as a creation of Robert Bloch. Yes, of Psycho fame, which first appeared in his short story The Secret in the Tomb, published in the May 1935 issue of Weird Tales. Inspired by Lovecraft's Necronomicon, De Vermis Mysteris is an iron-bound grimoire, which, in the words of the unnamed narrator of Secret in the Tomb, contained grim treatise on anthropomancy, necrology, lycanthropical and vampiristic spells and charms, witchcraft, and long rambling screeds in Arabic, Sanskrit, and prehistoric ideography, on which lay the dust of centuries. Penned by the mad mage Ludwig Prynne, who was eventually burned at the stake for his heresies, De Vermis Mysteris fell into the possession of one Jonathan Strange, warlock and grave robber. This is the first of many famous literary grimoires found over Iru's short duration, all of which were famed for driving their readers to madness, which is our first hint at what sort of story is being told here. He says he'll head back to Class 3-4 to help out, and takes his leave. Before we proceed further, let's take a little detour up to the top floor, which boasts a small rooftop terrace and basketball court. Past this is an observatory with its own massive telescope, currently undergoing preparation for the Cultural Festival's stargazing event. Heading up here, the first thing we see is a glowing blue marble, pitched in our direction, landing in front of us with a dull tinkle. Covered in thousands of tiny letters and characters, there's nothing we can do with this at present, but it's no doubt important, so we slip it into our inventory. It's unfair to leave Mochizuki to build the takoyaki stand all on his lonesome, so we head back to 3-4 to give him a hand. Inside, we find Hikawa getting on his case, mocking him for looking for leads on his quote-unquote dead brother. He's got a real bee in his bonnet about it, but before it can come to blows, he notices that we're now a witness and backs off. Mochizuki is baffled by why it's any of Hikawa's business, but remains undeterred. Heading back to the art room, we sneak up on Kyoko and Rie, endlessly washing their hands. The forthright Kyoko is encouraging her timid friend to act on her crush on Inaba before he graduates this year. Whoop. Dope. No, that's the sink. It's amazing they don't notice. You need to be in the exact spot for the correct interaction. The two get a little flustered when Inaba approaches, and he pretends he didn't hear anything at all. What a dick. We can find Hikawa again in the career center, where Hojo asks Yuma to meet him. We walk in on another bad action. Hikawa has Yuma kabedon to the wall, and she looks mighty unhappy about it. As with Mochizuki, our entrance diffuses the situation, giving Yuma the opportunity to escape. Hikawa doesn't take this lying down, however, and tells us to step off what's his before giving us a shove for good measure. This is one nasty little twerp, and it seems like he's gonna be a problem. Yuma, short on words, runs off to Miss Hojo's office. Misa, meanwhile, has found Hikawa, who treats her just as brutally as he does everybody else. Her dialogue suggests this is out of character for him, but Inaba can't really get anything more out of her. Hikawa continues his marauding of campus by next harassing sweet-natured old Hirose. He bullies him into agreeing to perform some kind of task for him, but, like Misa, Hirose won't spill. Ow! Middle-aged man jump scare! This is hard-bodied Principal Murabe Kozo. Look at his head flapping up and down when he talks like a muppet. He tells us to continue the good work before heading on his way. Inaba describes the impact like running face first into a brick wall. Heading to Hojo's office, we find not Yuma, but a new character. Mr. Mori, another faculty member. He's making an impassioned confession of love to Miss Hojo, and couples this with a vague blackmail threat, because he's a really classy guy, and that always works. Once again, Inaba walks in and ruins the kimochi warui between the two teachers. Hojo's thankful for the assist, but it doesn't get any closer to us finding Yuma. Checking back in with the art club girls, Rie is staring up at the moon, completely transfixed. Kyoko mentions the coming lunar eclipse, and Rie only acts stranger, not even turning around to see her crush. We do a bit of a do-si-do here to try and get Hojo's assistance, and walk in on yet another tense conversation. Our hard-bodied principal appears to be giving her something of a dressing down. As she apologizes, the principal takes his leave and gives Inaba a dressing down of his own for his inability to knock before entering. We try to find the words to explain Rie's condition, but Hojo mutters under her breath about something happening faster than she thought, but offers us no assistance. As we look for somebody, anybody who can help this poor girl, we run into Mochizuki in the reference room. Inaba gives him a hard time for slacking off, but he complains of a splitting headache, facing away from us and panting heavily. When we emerge from the reference room, the lights go out with a sizzling sound. I do love how Inaba's eyes slowly adjust to the darkness here. We quickly spot Kyoko standing outside the women's restroom, banging on the door. Rie kept chanting to herself about the moon before locking herself inside. Kyoko asks us to go get Miss Hojo again. Stressing urgency, Hojo says she'll help eventually, and sends us back to tell the girls she's on her way. But when we arrive, Kyoko's already in the restroom and is banging on the stall. Inaba swallows his pride and enters, when... oh, jeez. Poor Kyoko, we hardly knew ya. Inaba's about to get his just desserts for toying with this girl's heart, but he runs into the reference room to escape. And here we have our first stalker sequence. Resembling Clock Tower at first blush, you have a decent amount of time to figure out a place to hide before Rie enters the room, illustrated clearly by the animated diagram at the top of the screen. Failure spells certain death and a trip back to the title screen, but this is easy enough. The timer's absurdly generous, and the hiding spot is...
It was my destiny to be here, in the box.
Rie, being in some kind of trance, lacks object permanence. She saw Inaba enter the room, but didn't see him enter the box, so I guess there's no point in checking. After a tense glimpse through the handle opening, Rie stumbles off to stalk the halls. Or so you'd think. Throughout Kirigaoka High School, you'll find objects such as covered tables or beds, which, upon examining, Inaba remarks would make a good hiding place, a la Clock Tower. But, in fact, Iru has very few moving parts. The only times that you're ever at risk are during these choreographed, single-room hiding sequences, of which you can count on one hand. There is very little actual threat to be found in this game. In Rie's case, when she walked out of the reference room, she kept on going right out of this game, never to be seen again. But the mood is pretty undeniably on point. This change in music signifies that things will never be the same again. Similarly, Kyoko's body vanished from the women's room, leaving no bloodstains, and the door that Rie threw off the hinges mysteriously back in place, as if nothing ever happened. Inaba doubts his sanity, but then sees Mochizuki entering the reference room again. Still plagued by headaches, Mochizuki screams before suddenly quieting down, seemingly undergoing some kind of change. He asks where he is, and when Inaba expresses confusion at the question, he simply shoves us to the ground and leaves in search of quicker answers. He wasn't able to find any though, because he's waiting for us outside to ask again. When Inaba explains that we're, of course, at Kirigaoka High, Mochizuki states he's returned, says that we haven't met before, and something about a time distortion. Before we can get any answers, he says he has things to investigate before walking off into the darkness. It's around now that we can begin to find torn notebook pages scattered around the school. The first one we find tells us about the Gem of Retrospective, a magical artifact which, when placed in one's mouth, allows its user to understand arcane languages. We have something in our inventory that fits that description, the blue marble, so casually tossed to us during our trip to the observatory. Examining this causes Inaba to make the connection, and the blue marble becomes the Gem of Retrospective in our inventory, ready for us when we need it. Retrospective will be immediately recognizable to those familiar with Lovecraft, the ancient non-Euclidean city sunken beneath the waves of the South Pacific, where, to quote the Call of Cthulhu, "In his house at Retrospective, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming," ready to one day rise again and usher in a new age of terror. Back in 3-4, we find Hirose waddling over as insensitively as ever. He seems to be looking for Mochizuki as well. Apparently Hikawa tasked Hirose with sending Mochizuki to the meeting room, entrusting him with the key to its lock. He gives up pretty easily though, and heads to the meeting room himself to return the key to Hikawa and head home for the evening. Without any other leads, we follow Hirose to the meeting room. Oh boy, I don't know if we really need the scene of Hirose growing thinner as his innards are sucked from his body like some kind of fatal liposuction. That just seems like insult to injury. Dead and covered in a weird blue fluid, Mochizuki barges in to say Hirose only has himself to blame for his carelessness, and informs us that he just served as prey for a hound of Tindalos. The Hounds of Tindalos are a creation of Frank Belknap Long Jr., a younger member of Lovecraft's writing circle. He started communicating with Ol Howard when he was barely out of his teens, and The Hounds of Tindalos, written at the age of 27, was the first mythos story written by someone other than Lovecraft himself, opening the doors to many of the other authors we'll see throughout the course of this game. First published in the March 1929 issue of Weird Tales, The Hounds of Tindalos concerns a fictionalized portrayal of Belknap Long as narrator, and his relationship with one Halpin Chalmers, an arcane researcher who rejects the teachings of modern science in pursuit of mankind's true origins. Chalmers uses psychotropic drugs in an attempt to travel through time. Frank is forced to trip sit and write down his arcane truths before he forgets them. Chalmers ends up being everything everywhere all at once, simultaneously Caesar and Roman slave. While between the spaces, his scent is picked up by the Hounds of Tindalos, carnivorous creatures that exist within the gaps of space-time, preying on any would-be travelers. They're described as the pure embodiment of evil, undulating with lean, agile bodies, given birth by some kind of unforgivable sin of early humankind. To quote the story, "There is merely the pure and the foul. The foul expresses itself through angles, the pure through curves. The hounds are the foul, which I guess makes them the kiki to humanity's boba." But most importantly, once they track the careless psychonaut's scent, they can slip through angles to enter our dimension, and kill Chalmers much like Hirose and Iru, by sucking out his life force, leaving him drained of blood and covered in a sticky blue ichor which cannot be identified through modern chemistry. The implication, of course, is the end of humanity is at hand now that the Hounds have free passage. In Iru, the Hounds are contacted through this artifact, the cursed Mirror of Notran. My resources are coming up empty here, so I suspect this might be an original creation for the game, but do let me know if I'm mistaken here. Either way, it's clearly based on any number of supernatural mirrors that occur in mythology and fiction. This mirror was being used as a murder trap by Hikawa. He attempted to use Hirose to lure Mochizuki to his doom, but the big boy's pure-hearted curiosity got the better of him. The question is, why would Hikawa go so far? Looking for Miss Hojo again, we enter her office, but hear footsteps coming up behind us. Panicked that it might be Rie, Inaba quickly clambers into an out-of-place locker at the back of the room and waits. What a nerd. What we end up witnessing is Hikawa in conversation with an unseen woman, giving him orders in preparation for the final ritual. As she leaves, he basically calls her a sucker under his breath. Inaba doesn't deign to comment on any of this, and instead exits the office, where we hear some telltale, wet, slappy footsteps coming down the hall. It's Miss Hojo herself. Inaba reports Hirose's death, and Hojo seems to already know. She encourages us to escape, but not to tell any of the other students about what we witnessed. So obviously, we follow her back into her office to find her seated at her desk, sobbing. She's expressing regret to Masayoshi, the elder Mochizuki, for some kind of sin. Inaba reads the room and backs away slowly. Ever the messenger, we find Mochizuki in the reference room again. This time, he seems to be back to his old self, and apologizes for lashing out during the worst of his headache. Apparently he blacked out and doesn't remember talking to us earlier, nor witnessing Hirose's demise. Inaba doesn't really put two and two together, but does end up accidentally warning Mochizuki that Hikawa has it in for him. Down at the end of the hall, the wall of desks has been disassembled, and Nakanishi is none the wiser as a magic circle opens behind him. From the negative space grows a Shoggoth, an undulating mound of slime and tentacles that devours our bemulleted friend in a single gulp. It slithers and squelches, seemingly held in place by the magic circle, only able to harm those who draw too near its prison. The Shoggoth is another famous Lovecraft creation, and one most closely associated with his novelette At the Mountains of Madness. In the story, geologist William Dyer details a disastrous expedition he previously led to Antarctica. Found within the Hollow Earth, the Shoggoths were a slave race created by the Great Old Ones to serve as builders and custodians. Eventually, they developed intelligence and rebelled violently against their former masters. Resembling giant amoeba, Dyer describes them as normally shapeless entities composed of a viscous jelly which looked like an agglutination of bubbles, each averaged about 15 feet in diameter when a sphere. They had, however, a constantly shifting shape and volume, throwing out temporary developments or forming apparent organs of sight, hearing, and speech in imitation of their masters, either spontaneously or according to suggestion. Inaba won't get too close to the Schluben horror, but in effect one barrier has been replaced with another. Now, how do we deal with this? Well, we make our rounds towards Classroom 3-4 again, where we find someone carelessly drop the key to Class 3-5 in the central hallway. You know, the stinky room. Inside the fog of stench, we find a wooden box from which the stench is emanating, and a sledgehammer. You can pick up the sledgehammer, but it's a trap. Using it on the box will attract unwanted attention. So against our noses' better judgment, we use the crowbar to loosen the box's lid to find a glass jar of meat. Now, this definitely looks like human remains pounded down to a fine slurry. Looks like there's a tiny hand pressing against the glass there. What is this? Who is this? Why is this here? Anyway, it's nasty. Inaba shoves the whole dang thing into his pocket, unconcerned with becoming the stinky guy. Well, we know what to do with this, don't we? That's right, we feed it to the Shoggoth, which then melts back into a circle with a belch. I guess Nakanishi wasn't quite enough for the big guy, and he needed a digestif. And with that, the way down to the second floor is finally open to us. We don't get very far before we encounter a second magic circle. From this one grows a fungal-like organism of throbbing gristle and chattering teeth, blocking our route to the central hallway. Not a lot we can do about that at the moment, so we head down to the first floor, where we encounter a bewildered Mochizuki looming over the body of a fellow student. The boy is in a crumpled heap of limbs and blood, as if he was mauled by a wild animal, ribcage split apart, exposed through a ruined chest. Mochizuki's panicking. He blacked out, and when we came to, he was standing here. Afraid of what he may have done, he runs past us and back up the stairs. Look at this poor kid's Playmobil face. Kind of endearing. If we duck into the infirmary, we can find the nurse huddled in a quivering heap, mumbling about a fish monster outside the window. We can try to run right out the front door, but it's held fast by a mysterious force. In the teacher's lounge, we find a student named Yoko, who, like the nurse, is quivering in a corner and can't be raised. The most important place on this floor is Principal Murabe's office. On the bookshelf, we can find a record of his family tree, which lists the Aikawa family, just like in Inaba's dream. This was no secret, but we also spy the name Ichinomiya, Yuma's family, as a distant relation. The other bookshelf has a different book, The King in Yellow. As Inaba reads on and tries to comprehend its words, strange sensations overcome him. He grows cold, a foul stench permeates the air, as if something is being summoned. Eventually, he gathers the willpower to slam it shut and put it back on the shelf, but what's been read may be irreversible. This is one that I've always enjoyed, despite its unevenness. Written by Robert W. Chambers in 1895, The King in Yellow is an anthology of loosely connected short stories revolving around the titular in-fiction play, a surreal and ominous work which the act of reading is enough to drive one to madness. There's actually less of this within the book than one would expect, or even desire, but the stories The Repairer of Reputations and The Yellow Sign are the true standouts. Ever the literary magpie, Lovecraft references the ambiguous King in Yellow figure Hastur, originally an Ambrose Bierce creation, although in Bierce's case a benign shepherd deity, within his story The Whisperer in the Darkness. After Lovecraft's death, professional fanboy August Derleth picked this up and ran with it, penning a handful of stories that developed Hastur into a great old one, and explicitly tied it to the King in Yellow, the performance of the play serving as a summoning ritual. Since then, for better or worse, many other professional fanboys have followed suit, but the idea of a play script capable of inflicting motif of harmful sensation endures for a reason. Behind the principal's desk, we find a golden key with a ruby embedded in its bow, which perfectly matches the locked bookshelf in Miss Hojo's office. On the wall are a few portraits of former principals, with space for one more. Way back in the art room, we had the opportunity to pick up a conspicuous portrait of the principal, seemingly painted by some suck-up, but actually the stolen key to this puzzle. When we return the portrait to its rightful place, a hidey hole in the wall opens up, revealing the principal's stash, a little velvet bag of blue powder. On our way back up to the second floor, we hear a positively Jurassic Park-ass growl as we see Yuma gingerly strutting down the hallway. Before we can catch up to her, she's chased off by a fish creature, presumably the one the nurse was so afraid of downstairs. He doesn't have the energy to chase after Yuma, so he quickly turns his attention to us, and we duck into the science lab to hide. Just like with Rie, there's one hiding spot, beneath the teacher's podium. He walks right by. Idiot. If this big fishy boy wasn't already familiar to you, we later learn this is a deep one. One of Lovecraft's more enduring creations, from The Shadow over Innsmouth, written in 1931. A student goes antiquing in the backwater New England village of Innsmouth, where he discovers the insular and unfriendly townsfolk have been breeding with the Deep Ones to create a new race of fishman hybrids, who attack him in the night at his hotel and chase him out of town. This probably has the most moment-to-moment action of any of Lovecraft's stories, and as such the Innsmouth escape has been adapted to more than one video game. most famously in 2005's Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. It's a fun read, but one of the more problematic stories in a very problematic bibliography, clearly inspired by the author's abject terror at miscegenation and people in a lower social class than he. Now, this fella's a long way from home. How do you think he got here from New England? Swam, I guess, but reaching Japan by sea is going to take a lot of circumnavigation. Hardly seems worth it. Before leaving the science room, we pick up a box of matches and, oh hey, Cthulhu brand, capable of lighting in even the dankest cyclopean structures, before we resume our search for Yuma. Well, there's Mochizuki in the library, who tells us this creature in the central corridor is something called the Formless Spawn, summoned by black magic. The spell to seal it away should be nearby, but he faints before he can tell us anything else. The Formless Spawn are a creation of Clark Ashton Smith, first appearing in his story The Tale of Satampra Zeros, published in the November 1931 issue of Weird Tales. The story follows the titular grave robber as he skulks around the prehistoric land of Hyperborea, another mythos setting first introduced in this story. As he enters the shrine of the esoteric god Tasagatha, Satampra and his companion are beset by the god's avatars. As described by our narrator, we watched in utter horror when an uncouth, amorphous head with dull, bulging eyes arose gradually on an ever-lengthening neck and stared us in the face with primordial malignity. Then, two arms, if one could call them arms, likewise arose inch by inch, and we saw that this thing was not, as we had thought, a creature immersed in the liquid, but that the liquid itself had put forth this hideous neck and head, and was now forming these damnable arms that groped towards us with tentacle-like appendages in lieu of claws or hands. We spy there's also a locked bookcase identical to the one in Miss Hojo's office, which matches the key that we just lifted from the principal. Inside, we find Demonolatre Libritres, which appears to be some sort of grimoire. Now, this is a real book, but not a spell book. The Demonolatre Libritres is by one Nicolas Remy, a 16th century French magistrate, who had a real hard-on for witch hunts and torture. This book is a collection of his quote-unquote knowledge to aid his fellow witch-finders on how best to locate the women they wish to brutalize. If this shows up in any of Lovecraft stories, I'm unfamiliar, but I wouldn't be surprised. Likewise, I was not surprised to learn that this is a usable item in, you guessed it, the Call of Cthulhu tabletop game. Now, in Iru, the Demonolatre teaches us about the Powder of Ibn Ghazi, another usable item from the tabletop game, which can be sprinkled on the unseen to make it visible. The powder has the same effect here, but first we must concoct it by combining 3 powders together. In the trash, we find a torn page, and popping the gem of Verlier into our mouth, we can read that it's only half of an incantation. Not immediately useful, we head back upstairs to see if we can get into Hojo's bookcase next. But Hojo's already inside. We stealthily watch as she seems to be sobbing, but her sharp breaths soon give way to maniacal laughter. She's planning some sort of blood ceremony to revive a god and purge the filth. She falls to her knees in front of a conspicuous photo album, uttering a few more sobs. Inaba smartly turns on his heels and walks away without alerting Hojo to his presence. Sure seems bad. Our art teacher cannot be trusted, but we gotta get to that bookshelf. We head back downstairs and take a peek in the craft room, where we're immediately beset by that dang deep one. It really seems like it's the end for poor old Inaba, but this isn't an instant death. Who comes to the rescue but Hikawa of all people, who banishes the fish with a beam of light and a command to obey Abhorreth's anger. Now, I may be mistaken, but I believe Abhorreth is a mistransliteration of Abhoth, another Clark Ashton Smith creation, from his story The Seven Geases, published in the October 1934 issue of Weird Tales. This is a fantasy adventure in which a small battalion enter a monster-filled cavern and come face to face with a race of primordial eugenicists who attempt to throw our protagonists into the pit of Abhoth, who is described as a cosmic god of all unclean entities. Hikawa swiftly reverts from savior to asshole as he tells us to fuck off, before leaving the crafting room himself. With our pants pooped, there's actually not anything else in here, but this does raise the flag for Hojo to move on. First, we take a look at the photo album she left on the floor, which is open to a page bearing a photo dated 3 years ago of Hojo alongside 2 boys, Masayoshi, the elder Mochizuki, and Kamiyama, who we don't know. We can also finally get into that bookcase and steal Hojo, or Masayoshi's, copy of De Vermis Mysteris for ourselves. Putting the gem in our mouth, we get a passage about the star vampires of Kadath, their presence given away by their tittering laughter, but exposing them, perhaps with the power of Ibn Ghazi, will send them back to their own plane. Now, we're combining 2 different stories here. I'll talk about Kadath later, because it does come up again, but we can talk about the star vampires now. These are a Robert Bloch creation, which first appear in The Shambler from the Stars, published in the September 1935 issue of Weird Tales. Our unnamed narrator is an aspiring writer who seeks out all manner of cursed grimoires in his thirst for knowledge, and ends up inadvertently summoning a star vampire, an invisible creature capable of draining a body of all its fluids. As the star vampire's belly fills with blood, it slowly becomes more visible, and though the protagonist survives, the sight of the creature drives him completely mad. Back in the library annex, we find Mochizuki huddled in a corner. He found a note in his pocket, which finally reveals what's been going on with him. A surprisingly polite and cordial someone has been summoned here by force, and is using Mochizuki's body as a vessel. Mochizuki has no control or memory during these periods, which are almost assuredly brought on by the splitting headaches we've witnessed. Mochizuki and his passenger have been communicating back and forth, and from now on, the notes each consciousness has discarded can be found throughout the school to shed a little more light on what's going on. There is said to be another grimoire in the main library that may help us. Upon entering, we can hear the telltale sound of slurpin' and a crunchin', and peering around the corner, we can spy a deep one feasting on one of our fellow students. We sneak our way over to the returns desk. Sneak is a little generous. All you need to do is not get right up in his business to retrieve the Book of Abon. This is another Clark Ashton Smith creation in a game increasingly full of them. The Book of Abon, like the Necronomicon or De Vermis Mysteris, is another forbidden tome of black magic and obscure power. It has appeared in many, many stories by Smith and Lovecraft alike. Robert Bloch was a particular fan and incorporated it into many of his stories as well. In-game, this is the book from which the torn page was torn. Pairing the two, we come upon the incantation capable of banishing the formless spawn, allowing us passage to the south wing of the second floor, and finally giving us free run of the school. Here's where things get pretty fun, as we can go around and see what some of the other classes had planned for the cultural festival. The second years were preparing plays, cafes, speed dating, a casino? Surely this roulette table asset shows up in Crisis Beat. Oh, huh. Different asset. There's even a maze! How fun! Oh, okay, well maybe that's not so fun. We molest this poor kid's body to retrieve the conspicuous crimson jewel. We also pick up a jack from the storage room, just in case we need to change any tires tonight. Oh man, those little twerps in Class 1-5 stole our takoyaki stand idea. They got a load of food stalls. Looks like they managed to get home on time. Man, the counseling room looks more like in-school suspension. Anybody else have that? My high school didn't think getting sent home to play video games was an adequate punishment, so they stuck you in a room like this for a week, where you stared at the wall and a grumpy adult stared at the back of your head. On the north side of the first floor, we find Mr. Mori, bleeding out in the hallway. With his last breath, he starts to suggest the principal did this to him, but dies on the spot before we have the opportunity to learn anything further. Mochizuki turns up, seemingly as himself, but the memos he's been reading from his other self have convinced him that this is the beginning of the end of everything. So, about these memos. There are 10 of these, split down the middle, written by Mochizuki and his passenger, and found throughout the school after hitting various plot flags. Some of them give us hints on how to solve later puzzles. Also, sidebar, it's kind of funny that Robert Bloch is written as the author of Die Vermis Mysteris rather than the fictional Ludwig Prynne, which makes Bloch a mythos figure in this game. I think that must have been a mistake arisen from looking at tabletop resources, but who knows. Others give us further insight into what's going on. Mochizuki's passenger reveals his name to be Kamiyama Takayoshi, and claims to have his best interests at heart. He makes a number of other eye-opening claims, describing himself as a man who caught glimpse of a vast wisdom far beyond the reaches of mankind, and now serves as an observer for the great race of Yith. He also warns that an octopus-headed god will upend the current order, plunging the world into despair. We've seen the name Kamiyama once before, written beneath that photo of Hojo flanked by the two boys. Could this be the same guy? The Yith are a creation of Lovecraft himself, which debuted in 1936's The Shadow Out of Time, Lovecraft's penultimate published story before his passing in early 1937. Professor Peaslee, following a series of splitting headaches, underwent a period of amnesia and dissociation which lasted 5 years, the aftermath of which it felt as though his body were possessed by another entity. Those who observed him described his actions during this time as awkward, clumsy, as if he was controlling his body for the first time and was trying and failing to hide this. Peaslee in Fugue became a scientific marvel of the academic world, traveling across the world to numerous universities, ancient ruins, and labyrinths, forging relationships with numerous powerful figures in the occult. The consciousness possessing Peaslee is from the great race of Yith. To quote the story, queer and intricate shape, resembling no life form known to science. The Yith alone had conquered the secret of time. It had learned all things that ever were known or would ever be known, through its power of keener minds to project themselves into the past and future, even through gulfs of millions of years, to study the lore of every age. It sounds as though what Mochizuki's undergoing is parallel to the Shadow Out of Time, although Kamiyama's unable to maintain control for more than an hour or so at a time. On the south side of the first floor, a shutter is open just enough for us to jam our jack under it. We wrench it open and crouch under to find the chapel from Inaba's dream. Pews sit before a massive white statue of a goddess. Inaba's got no idea who this figure is, but behind the altar we find a depression in the wall which happens to be the exact shape of our crimson jewel. When inserted in the hole, the wall slides away to reveal a hidden study, filled to the brim with esoteric tomes and hazardously lit by unattended candles. There's some sort of tri-balance scale here. A velvet bag of yellow powder on the desk to go with our blue one, and a slender porcelain vase hidden behind a sofa. Back on the north side of the first floor, there's a conspicuous room with a blank faceplate. This is the sealed room, one of Kiragaoka's mysteries that we read about in the manual. We seem to have hit a flag that has unsealed it, which is a pretty dirty check absolutely everything move to pad out Iru's length. Inside, the halls are decked with Halloween decoration cobwebs and odd, unparsable paintings. I'm not sure what this is. It could be a piece of 18th century art, or it might be from an issue of Weird Tales. If you recognize it, do leave a comment. The centerpiece of the room are more unattended candles, flanking a smaller version of the goddess statue seen in the chapel, arms held out as if embracing something to its chest. We slot the vase into its hands, and the statue begins crying tears of blood. With an organ sting and a drip, 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 it fills the vase to the brim, which we then take to the science room and put on the Bunsen until it burns down to a fine red powder. Makes perfect sense. Now we have 3 powders of 3 primary colors, and we take them back to the chapel's hidden room to balance them evenly on the scale. Somehow, this creates the powder of Ibn Ghazi. At this point, we've hit another snag, which necessitates running all over campus in an effort to trigger the next flag. Heading up to the 3rd floor, we find poor Misa unceremoniously killed off-screen and shoved into the corner of her classroom. We also observe Mochizuki leaving Miss Hojo's office again, and if we check the room after him, we find the photo of Hojo, Kamiyama, and Masayoshi is now missing. We can catch up with him in the reference room, where he shows us he did indeed steal the photo, as well as a memo ostensibly written by Miss Hojo, which mentions the elder Mochizuki betrayed her, so she threw him into a cave full of flesh-eating monsters. Look at this dialogue. I love how these two are not surprised in the least about the flesh-eating monster cave beneath the school. Very matter-of-fact conversation happening here. And then Mochizuki punches us, because Inaba's just a little bitch. Mochizuki hasn't gone far. He's cornered Miss Hojo in her office. But this isn't Mochizuki. This is Kamiyama. He seems to know all about Hojo's plans to revive some kind of dark god. He takes on quite a vindictive tone here. Our interactions with Kamiyama always gave us the impression of a sociopath, but this scene all but proves that his memos to Mochizuki are probably lies. Kamiyama's not here to stop Hojo, but instead bear witness to whatever cataclysm she brings about, I suppose to transmit back to the Yith. Inaba watches this play out and once again doesn't comment at all. After even more wonky flagging, we run into Mochizuki on the 2nd floor hallway, seemingly returned to his senses. He received a note from Kamiyama offering a deal. If we get our hands on De Vermis Mysteris for him, he'll tell us how to escape the barrier sealing the campus. We hand over the book that we just lifted from Hojo's office. Mochizuki's plagued by another headache. The 2 consciousnesses seem to be mixing together, and he sees visions of strange, cone-shaped creatures. He hands us a locket with a photo of the Mochizuki brothers inside before fainting once more. Hey, anybody watching who has a sibling, do you or would you wear a locket with a photo of you together in it? It seems a little weird to me, but I'm an only child, so I don't know. After even more wonky flagging, we hear Yuma's voice call to us from the 3rd floor balcony. She's not sure exactly how she got up there, but before she can tell us any more, she's violently pulled by the arm off stage by an unseen figure. Screaming for help, we bound up the stairs to find her having a sit-down in Class 3-4, our safe haven. She says Hikawa attacked her just now. No word on how she got away or why he gave up. She sprained her ankle on the way back to the classroom and can't walk, so Inaba offers to make a trip down to the nurse's office to get, painkillers? A crutch? He doesn't specify, but we head downstairs. When we reach the nurse's office, damn, the principal's a messy freak. He describes his murder spree with the delight of a man sitting down to a fancy slice of cake. Well, this is a bad development, which leads to our 3rd hiding sequence. There's already a corpse in this room, poor old Yoko, who we saw earlier, likely got by the principal. We clamber into this locker to hide, and I really like the view through the slats. Look at this. This is pretty pathetic. I'll hand it to Rie, but what's this guy's excuse for not throwing open this locker door right here and now? The principal sure went to town on the nurse. Like the student we found in the hallway, her chest has been opened, ribcage split. I guess this must be his MO. This makes Inaba forget all about the medicine, or bandages, or whatever he was hoping to do for Yuma's leg, so we head back upstairs empty-handed. Of course, Yuma is now gone. We run out into the halls to see if we can find her, but instead we find Hikawa drawing a summoning circle in front of the stairs to the 4th floor. He rises to his feet and announces Yuma's needed for the awakening ritual. Swearing to dominate the world, he leaves up the stairs, an uncanny giggling in his wake. We've read about this before, haven't we? De Vermis Mysteris describes the star vampires of Kadath as invisible beings given away by their tittering. Fortunately, Kamiyama left a note on how to deal with this, and only a couple of steps away. We sprinkle the powder of Ibn Ghazi onto the summoning circle, revealing the star vampire and sending it back from whence it came. We race up to the 4th floor, where we find Yuma on the terrace. Once again, hope shattered, along with the skylight, as some kind of dragon descends to steal her away. With a thunk, we're bonked on the back of the head, and everything goes black. When we come to, we're face down on a hard stone floor. The surroundings aren't remotely familiar, but the voice that echoes above us is. It's Hikawa, of course, who's thrown us into these ancient catacombs beneath the school. He gives us an ultimatum. He'll release Yuma and let us out of here if we move the Elder Sign. The Elder Sign is a Lovecraft classic, and one with many incarnations and forms which change from story to story. It has been described as a hand gesture, the shape of a sprig, a mysterious stone, a symbol similar to a Buddhist manji, don't, and, most frequently, a 5-pointed star with an eye in its center. Much like its depictions, the sign's powers and effects vary as well. Most often, they're used as a deterrent or object of protection against the myriad cosmic horrors seen throughout the mythos. If Hikawa's goal was to move something bearing the sign, the implication is that he wants its effect lessened, or perhaps to unseal something beneath it. Hikawa seems like a guy who always keeps his promises, so we agree. That pentagonal sigil shows up here again as our save point, not on a blackboard, but carved into stone, further cementing its status as something quite ominous. So here we are, heading deeper into this dungeon, picking up a little octagonal crest along the way. This actually looks a lot like the Elder Sign. In the next room, we run afoul of the old ceiling crush trap. You're given a lot of time to solve this one. There's a tunnel leading out which appears to be blocked by something invisible. Well, I guess this means Ibn Ghazi ain't going away. With the invisible block revealed, we clamber through this habitrail and install our crest into the wall, which retracts the ceiling and unlocks the door. And finally, we come to the chamber of the Elder Sign, blocked off by a light barrier like Mission Impossible. Here we need to blow out the 2 lit candles and then use our crimson jewel in an indentation in the wall, from which a faint green light shines through. Projected through the jewel, the light becomes an intense red laser beam, making contact with the barrier and shorting it out. Inaba, our star pupil, pushes the Elder Sign to one side, which causes some very ominous things to happen. That wasn't good, he remarks. Yeah, no shit. We don't actually return to Hikawa now. We follow the path onward and emerge from a grave into a cave. Well, they're not actually graves. They're stones engraved with the teachings of some obscure religion. Now, we could just go forward, but a true adventure gamer never follows the beaten path. Off to the side is a twisty-turny passage which is easy to miss. The tunnel mouth opens up into a room full of skeletal remains and something waiting, panting in the darkness. The creature catches sight of us and does the Charleston on over. It's Masayoshi, the elder Mochizuki brother. He was thrown into this pit by Miss Hojo. They were indeed lovers, as well as members of a secret archaeological society alongside Kamiyama. Sounds a little bit like a Jules and Jim situation. Eventually, Miss Hojo confided in Masayoshi that she was born to a prominent family in Innsmouth, and is in fact half American. Half deep one. Despite loving her, he rejected her outright, and she banished him to the caverns to become a ghoul. Damn, I guess that's why her footsteps always sounded so wet. Interestingly, Masayoshi is completely past it. He talks about how he formed some real special relationships with the ghouls down here, and before he knew it, he became a ghoul himself. Masayoshi's astonishingly polite, and has quite a zen attitude to his new lot in life. He does retain a soft spot for his brother, and gives us a letter to deliver to him. He tells us to follow the other path to emerge into the school's clock tower. Well, he seems happy enough. Masayoshi, the zen, tender, happy ghoul. He probably does eat people, though. Visiting Masayoshi to retrieve this letter is the key to achieving Iru's true ending. Remember how I said the dream quest of unknown Kadath would come up again? Well, Masayoshi's role as friendly ghoul is likely a nod to this story, which was written in 1927, but first published in 1943, half a decade after Lovecraft's passing. One of his many stories featuring his character Randolph Carter, Unknown Kadath is an incredibly ambitious epic in which Carter seeks the titular Phantom City via lucid dreaming and astral projection. On his quest, he finds himself thrown into the underworld and left to die, where he encounters his erstwhile friend, Richard Pickman, who vanished years ago, only to become a ghoul in this phantom realm. Far less erudite than Masayoshi, Pickman is only able to communicate through garbled, broken English, but his friendship for Carter remains, and he assists him in escaping the underworld. On our way to the clock tower, we get harassed by a pair of ghouls who didn't get the memo that we're buds with Masayoshi, and we have our final pursuit sequence as we make a break for the clock tower. Well, now who's this in prison? Chained up and emaciated is the real Principal Murabe. The psycho killer who attacked us back at school was a golem made in his image. He doesn't tell us who put him here, but he does give us quite the telling off for moving the Elder sign. And here we get the first name drop of the big boy. The cult's aim is to revive the offspring of Cthulhu. This gigantic tentacle-headed entity who lies sleeping in Rolia needs no introduction. If he awakes, the world will surely end. The fact that Iru deals with the offspring and not Cthulhu himself gives credence to the idea that this game may have been a Call of Cthulhu tabletop campaign, allowing the big guy to have a child beneath Japan while maintaining his presence elsewhere in the mythos. Murabe believes that his granddaughter, Aikawa, is to serve as sacrifice, but Inaba breaks the news that she must be dead because she died in his dream. He takes it pretty well, and immediately moves on to wondering who the next sacrifice will be. Well, you guessed it, it's Yuma. We get some pretty convoluted lore here about how the principal's family are guardians of Cthulhu Jr.'s prison, and the school was built as a decoy. Without wasting any more time, we run up the stairs. Soon, we find Mochizuki rolling on the floor and babbling about the fourth dimension, black magic, Hikawa, and some figure called Azathoth. Azathoth, aka the Blind Idiot God, is another Lovecraft entity. Originally planned for an unfinished story of the same name, Azathoth has appeared in several of Lovecraft's more prominent tales, including Dreams in the Witch House, The Thing on the Doorstep, and of course, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. It's a constant shifting being of pure chaos. It cannot be described or even clearly observed. Its presence as a revered figure within the Necronomicon is enough to strike fear into the hearts of any who encounter those pages. Mochizuki's clearly about to die, but before he succumbs, he tells us Hikawa left him to this fate, and leaves us Notran's mirror, hey, it's back, and an incantation. If we deliver Masayoshi's letter, he gives us a third item, the Spirit Elixir, a magical formula capable of healing the soul. And with that, Mochizuki breathes his last, his tomb being this room full of shelves and crates on loan from the school assets collection. In the next room, we find Hikawa having a little giggle to himself. It appears he's been reading the Necronomicon. It's driven him quite mad. He stumbles out the door and lets out a scream. Much like Cthulhu, if you're here, I'm sure the Necronomicon needs no introduction. The tome of Lovecraft's work, an evil grimoire written by the mad monk Abdul al-Hazred, bound in human flesh and capable of driving any readers to madness. The Necronomicon shows up absolutely everywhere across horror media, to the point where it's unrealistic to be able to really catalog everything it's inspired. You'll see it everywhere from Evil Dead to Corpse Party. Inaba won't pick up the Necronomicon himself, but we can read the conveniently placed diary of somebody who reports their friend read it, let out a scream, and then fell down the stairs and died. This is likely what happened to Hikawa, but if we head back down the stairs, his body is nowhere to be found. The clock tower's gears are preventing us from moving on, so we have to throw a monkey wrench into the works. Time to say goodbye to our faithful old crowbar, with us from the very beginning and always by our side. Salute. I think I'd be pretty scared climbing these gears. I'd probably just turn around and take my chances with Masayoshi back downstairs. We make it to the rooftop, where a ritual altar has been set up. Yuma lies supine, surrounded by a barrier as a cloaked figure is in the midst of casting some kind of spell. We touch the barrier with a loud zap, attracting the cloaked figure's attention. It's Hojo, with a fetching purple lip stain to match her ceremonial robes. So here it is, the final timed sequence, which doubles as the choose your ending scene. For the worst ending, we just stand here like a ninny until the moon is fully eclipsed. Oh, now this is an ending. We get to see low poly Cthulhu Jr. rise from the depths. Look at that guy. Awesome. Fade to black, we get our final text scroll. Hojo was ripped apart, Inaba lost his mind before dying in the collapsing tower, and we get a fun Cthulhu history lesson. It's the end of everything forever. And then we get a reprise of the love theme from Iru, with shots of all of our dead friends as the credits roll. Now, obviously, we can't let things stand here. Let's pretend for a moment we didn't meet Masayoshi, and as such, we're not holding the spirit elixir. We raise the mirror towards Hojo and speak aloud the incantation received from Mochizuki. The Hound of Tindalos is summoned, barbed tongue outstretched, and we get this quite artful shot of the blue liquid splattering across the altar as Hojo's life force is drained. With the officiating priest subdued, we run to the altar, but Yuma can't be roused. The ending crawl here explains that Yuma ended up a gibbering wreck, institutionalized for a lengthy period. Inaba stayed at her side until she was discharged to her family, at which point he decided to part ways with her forever. And so, Inaba has nightmares every night of his friends who died so violently before his eyes. Roll credits! But of course, the best ending involves using the Mirror of Nortran while holding the spirit elixir. Down the hatch, kiddo! Yuma comes to her senses and we watch the eclipse reverse. Look at it go backwards! And now the ending crawl. The next day, all of the mutilated bodies were found on campus within the clock tower. The principal starved to death because Inaba forgot to let him out, and there's talk of a mutilated, unidentifiable body, which we can assume is Miss Hojo. Kirigaoka High is racked with scandal. Inaba and Yuma are both institutionalized with PTSD, and the two decide to go no contact for the rest of their lives. Inaba continues to have nightmares about the worst night of his life. Jesus Christ! Well, you can't say that's not a very Lovecraft ending. You can't have everything. But that's not quite the end. Did you know there's actually 2 routes through this game? I didn't until I decided to make this video. There aren't too many differences, but the ones that exist are pretty big, so I thought we could summarize before we wrap up. So after Hirose is killed by the Hound of Tindalos, instead of running to spy on Hojo crying at her desk, we can find her in the art room talking to Nakanishi, who's seemingly just stumbled upon Hirose's corpse himself and is understandably very upset about it. Hojo tries to calm him down, and Nakanishi goes full denial, convincing himself Hirose was just taking a nap. Immediately after this, we head to Class 3-3 to find Misa, who you'll remember died off screen in our last playthrough. She's cowering in a corner, and she's pretty receptive to Inaba helping her. As we attempt to calm her down, the door slides open behind us, and Hojo runs in. She asks us to go find the other students, while she takes care of Misa. We step outside, and immediately we hear a woman scream. We run back into the classroom to find Misa dead, covered in blood. I guess Hojo sure took care of her all right. Hojo claims the pair were attacked by a monster, though she doesn't seem to have any injuries herself. Sure. The next deviation occurs after we meet Mochizuki in the library and collect the torn page and the Demon Electre Libritres. Previously, we checked in with Miss Hojo in her office. We do the same here, except this time she's not there, which gives us earlier access to Die Vermis Mysteris. After this, we find Hojo in the staff room on the first floor, comforting Yuko, a student we previously found a couple of times, alive and dead. Like Misa, Miss Hojo is attempting to calm her down. She urges us all to escape as soon as possible, which... what's going on here? I'm getting some mixed signals from Hojo this time. After we're attacked in the crafting room, we can head back to the staff room to find Hojo in the midst of an existential crisis. As we learned in our previous playthrough, she knows what's happening tonight, but this time she wants to stop it. Inaba turns around and leaves without asking any questions. Classic Inaba. Later, we get chased by a deep one into a storage closet, but instead of going through a pursuit sequence, we find Hojo hiding. She's twisted her ankle, and her crisis of conscience continues. She begs our forgiveness, and again stresses to escape with as many of our fellow students as we can. After meeting with Mochizuki on the second floor and receiving his locket, we hear some telltale wet footsteps and see Hojo running in from the darkness, with the deep ones in hot pursuit. She kicks us square in the butt over the threshold of the central corridor before pulling the shutter down, and we hear her torn apart by her fellow fish folk. This isn't an off-screen I'll-be-back-later twist. Hojo's really gone this time. She sacrificed herself to save Inaba in this route. This suggests that half the school is now off-limits, but the shutter raises again almost immediately, and the rest of the game proceeds the same way, until we reach the clock tower. This time, the study with the Necronomicon is otherwise empty, and the robed figure at the top of the tower is Hikawa, his druid cosplay not really gelling with his perfect hair. The bad ending here reveals that Hikawa is no Hojo, and performed the summoning ritual completely wrong. Instead of summoning Cthulhu Jr., an all-engulfing fire breaks out, burning everyone to a crisp. The school collapsed into itself, and the ruins became a hotbed of urban legend. Some urban explorers found something wriggling within the ruins. Yikes. As for the other two endings, absolutely no divergence whatsoever. We kill Hikawa with the mirror, and the text about the dead body so mutilated they couldn't identify it handily covers both Hojo and Hikawa. So 2 laps through Iru, and we're left with a handful of unanswered questions. Like, who threw the gem of Rollier at us in the observatory? The game's director, dummy. Who else? Okay, but seriously now. What about Aikawa? Why did the cult kill her if they needed her for the ritual? What happened to Kyoko's body? And what happened to Rie? Who is the goddess in the chapel, and what's the deal with the hidden room? Why did Hikawa save us from the Deep One? What about Kamiyama? Did he go back to Yith, or did he die with Mochizuki? My personal big question is what the heck is going on with that fake principal? He's a golem, yet Hojo, who appears to be the one pulling the strings, is shown to be deferential to him. And for a lump of clay, he sure seems to be a bloodthirsty sadist as opposed to a lump of clay following its master's will. The answer to all of these questions, believe it or not, is Iru is a budget horror game from 1998, and we shouldn't think too hard about it. And that's Iru. But before we finish, how about a blooper reel of every unique death? Failing to hide from Rie. Looking into the mirror of Nortron. Using the hammer to smash open the box of meat. Meeting a chompy boy. Failing to hide from the deep one. Getting decapitated in first person, that's actually kind of intense. Entering the library and tapping the deep one on the shoulder. Failing to hide from the principal. Getting all your bones broken before getting sucked off by the star vampire. Getting crushed by the ceiling trap in the catacombs. And finally, meeting two chompy boys. Okay, look, I'll be the first to admit that Iru is clearly not the most proficient game. The Playmobil character models delight more than scare. It's a little buggy, overly reliant on obscure plot activation flags, and the manual's promise that this is a first-person pursuit-em-up is almost entirely baloney. One has to wonder if there were bigger, bolder plans for Iru. The myriad furniture which Inaba remarks he can hide under, and the lengthy instructions in the manual for dealing with foes, suggest this may have been more akin to Clock Tower earlier in development, but for whatever reason, just didn't work out. Perhaps technical limitations within the 3D space, or maybe it proved more frustrating than thrilling in testing. There's a fine line between a Clock Tower or a White Day, a labyrinth called school, after all. But I can't help but love this awkward little game. Damn if it isn't moody. Skulking around the low-poly, low-draw-distance halls to this spooky soundtrack just feels good, and we can catch glimpses of Iru's visual identity in some of the newer lo-fi indie horror games. I don't know if Chilla's Art ever played Iru, but Akamanto's low-poly school gives me the same delicious vibes. Soft Machine wouldn't make too many more games after Iru. The previously mentioned Crisis Beat and Lucifer Ring came out a few months later, and the developer finished their run by making a suite of WonderSwan games, including a port of Pocket Fighter, as well as the first ever One Piece game. From TV animation, One Piece, Mezase Kaizoku O, which is a card-based strategy game. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you're new, why not subscribe? I read everybody's comments, and y'all are so nice, even if I don't reply immediately. One person thought it was smart to comment with a weird transphobic non sequitur on an older video. My stance on that kind of thing is very clear, and that person can no longer comment here. But that's less than 1% of the comments I receive, which are overwhelmingly awesome. I saw a few of you write that my videos help you get to sleep, and as a chronic insomniac, that makes me happier than you could imagine. You have no idea. May we go on dream quests together. Have you played Iru? Leave a comment. Tell me about your experience. Okay, before we finish up here, I made a couple of guest appearances on some podcasts recently. I spoke with On the Shoulders of Giants, a giant robopod, about Vanguard Bandits and its infamous Victor Ireland translation. And I was also on a couple episodes of my friend's podcast CRT Sound System to discuss the music of Kara no Shoujo and the Valis series. I love all that stuff so much. You can also check out Kamurocho Confidential, the new Yakuza replay podcast I co-host with my friend Festi. We're finding it a little difficult to find time to record at the moment, but if you start at the beginning, you should have a bit of an overhead before you run out. Please check all of these out. I'm sure you'll enjoy them, so there's links to everything in the description. Most of all, I have to thank the indispensable archive.org for allowing me to access many of the more infrequently published stories used as reference materials for this video. Please support them with a donation if you can. Ya boy Nerve will be back soon with more spooks and goofs.
So crazy, they totally amaze me. Gotta ask my mom for one. For Shizzy, PSP, PSP, PSP. All I want for Christmas is my PSP. Wanna play when I'm walking down the street. All I want for Christmas is my PSP. Come on, mom and dad, get one for me.